Six Music. Right now, Six Music's artist collection. Kate Bush.
Running Up That Hill from Hounds of Love, the new Kate Bush album, or one side of the album, I should say, it's really called that. 3 years, Kate. It seems a very long time since the last album. What have you been doing?
Yeah, so I think this is the one question that is inevitable, really, isn't it? Well, after the last album, I had to take a break in order to create a new energy for this album. If I'd have started writing straight away without getting new stimulus, it would have been exactly the same energy that was on the last album. And I wanted to go for a very different kind of music, more positive, I think. And also I wanted to be brave enough to go ahead with the idea of a second side of the album actually being a form of concept, which took a bit of time to actually get up the courage to do.
And it must obviously take a long time to write. I think we'll talk about that in detail when we play some tracks. But I mean, everyone's calling you Greta Garbo and Lord Lucan and people like this, aren't they? To disappear for 3 years, you know. It must have been quite a difficult decision to take that long over it, really.
Well, I think the best decisions that I've made have happened in the last 2 years. I moved out of London. I spent some time at home, which I needed to do. Got in some new stimulus, found a new dance teacher. And most importantly, built and equipped our own recording studio, which we then recorded all the material in.
So does that mean then that you've got the freedom and the time to really experiment?
Absolutely. One of the worst things about working in commercial studios is, besides the distractions of outsiders and phones all the time, is that it's costing a phenomenal amount of money every hour. And if you want to experiment with things that take maybe a day and you want to go away and think about them, it's just prohibitive. You can't work that way.
But now, you see, one of the reasons that people must think that you disappeared was that the last album didn't go down terribly well with a lot of people, did it? I mean, is that disappointing and depressing?
Well, no, it's not actually. I mean, what I find strange is that particularly the media approach to the record was that it was not successful. But for me, I felt it was incredibly successful in that it made the top 3 in this country straight away. And I think the problem was that the singles didn't do well. But the one single that did do well off that album was timed a year before the release of the album, so perhaps it wasn't timed very well. But I was really pleased with that album, and I think the feedback that I've been getting as people gradually get into it is wonderful. I'm very pleased. And what I wanted to do is get rid of the problems I'd had on the last album, i.e. demos that I then had to totally recreate from scratch in the master studio, which I can do properly here, where I come in and actually write the tracks in the studio.
Well, now, look, we've talked about there being 2 distinct sides to the album, and the Hounds of Love one, which is like individual songs as such, they all seem to be interested in a particular area. I mean, you're going into the way relationships work. I mean, is this a preoccupation in terms of your lyrics, do you think?
I think it's to do with my life, that relationships are incredibly important, as I think they are in everyone's life. I think the vast majority of pieces of work that are written about are to do with relationships between people, because that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? The feedback and the interlinking and the not working of people together. It's a fascinating thing.
And funnily enough, of course, it goes back to Wuthering Heights, doesn't it, really? I mean, that sort of, that sort of almost destructive relationship, the destructive attraction. Has it always been an interest and a lyrical interest for you?
Yes, I think so. And again, it's a lyrical interest because it does interest me, the way that people can tear each other apart and yet they love each other. I think it's an irony. I think it's the irony of situations that are fascinating.
I don't want to press you and talk in personal terms, but clearly it has a personal reference as well, doesn't it? I mean, a personal relevance, I suppose, any lyric that you write.
I think so, in as much as it's expressing how I feel at that time, but then it's not necessarily autobiographical, which is something that does tend to be pushed on writers. As soon as they sing a lyric from a personal point of view, where they sing, I do this, I think this, it's not necessarily autobiographical, but it is expressing something that you feel at that time, perhaps about someone else rather than yourself.
Your records also, sometimes they quite scare me, you know.
Well, that's great if they scare you, because I think definitely some tracks, they're meant to be scary, and it's always very difficult for me to know how people do interpret the stuff at the other end. So if you're getting scared by some of it, if it's the right tracks, then I'm really pleased. I think what definitely inspires me is films that I watch that I find really scary, and there are a lot of people who do enjoy being scared by films. But I think what I like is the intensity of films when they start scaring you, when they're good. Like, for instance, Don't Look Now. It's just such an incredible experience. And when I write things, I ideally would love to be doing to people what happens to me when I'm affected by these things. So I think that's definitely the inspiration there.
We ought to talk about the other side now, really, didn't we? The concept side. It must have been a bit worrying, a bit daunting, really, just to approach the idea of a whole side of an album about one subject, because I mean, you know, everyone says that sort of thing went out in the 70s, don't they? I mean, it seems an old-fashioned idea.
Yes, which was in a way why I felt I had to think very carefully before I went for it, because of all the preconceptions that are very negative about such a thing. But I feel that's so wrong, because if anything, music is so much more akin to that kind of thing than being short stories like pop music is. I mean, classical music, opera, they all explore extensions of music. They get you involved. Again, more like films than short stories. And I think when it works, it's even more effective than a short piece of work.
So what's the story of the Ninth Wave?
It's about someone who is in the water for the night, and it's about the past, present and future coming to wake them up, to keep them awake. They're very tired and they just have to keep going till morning. And in many ways it's about someone going through an experience and coming out the other end, hopefully having learnt an awful lot about themselves during the process.
But is this person drowning or what?
They're trying not to drown. They're trying to stay awake until someone comes to save them.
Talk us through it, because I mean, there's something like I don't know how many tracks now. I mean, 5 or 6 tracks that go up to make the one piece. Waking the Witch. What's actually happening at this point?
At this point, they've just been woken up by friends who have come to stop them drowning as they go under the water. And as they surface, they see someone in the distance who comes close, and as they do, it's a witch finder. And it's the whole thing of having just saved themselves from drowning, there's now this apparition that is trying to drown them again, in this sort of parallel story of a witch finder trying to drown the witch. Whether she's innocent or guilty, she would die, and the water's the linking factor.
It seems to be based on Tennyson. I mean, there's some words anyway on the sleeve from Tennyson.
Yes, that was really something that came after the concept, in that I felt it was always nice to have a passage that was used to quote a situation that came from a poet. I've always liked that, again, when I've read books or whatever, and there's a little passage at the front that sort of sums it up. And the quote that we chose was from The Coming of Arthur, and it's really Tennyson talking about how he feels that waves work in a series of 9, and so there's a big build-up and a complete cycle within 9 waves, which seemed rather nicely relevant to what we were doing here.
It's very demanding, I think, a very demanding piece. I mean, lyrically especially, by which I mean I'm not absolutely certain about what goes on, but I think that's probably a good thing, isn't it?
Yes, I would very much like the idea of people listening to the album again and again, and as they hear it more, they go deeper into it. But what's nice is the feedback I've had so far. People are so aware of what's happening in there. It's very pleasing, because again, you're never sure if it's a bit too obscure for people to grasp, especially say 2-3 listens. But so many people really have understood what's happening in there.
Is that a compromise, though, you feel yourself having to make all the time? That something that's satisfying to you still has to be direct enough to get through to people fairly quickly, at least?
No. No, I think I always tend to just write something hoping that I've done the best for that particular song or whatever it is, and then just hope that people understand and like it. I don't think you can compromise because you're not sure, because they could well be where you are in your head. So I think you have to play to that.
People seem to come to music from two ways. They either want to go up on stage and do it, or they want to sit in a studio and write and create that way.
Yes. I get incredible enjoyment out of both, and they're two totally different worlds, which is again why I enjoy both, because they are so different from each other. There's the spontaneity of a tour, which you just can't beat, being up on a stage, and if something goes wrong you just got to cope with it, and everyone's out there with you, hopefully. It's wonderful. And the studio is so rewarding because you can spend as much time hopefully creating the best thing you can for that song, which is so important.
But you've only ever done one tour. You've only actually ever... Didn't you like it the first time, or what?
I loved it. I really loved it, and I learnt such a lot from it that was very important for the things that have come since. But my projects become so involved once I'm in them that there's just been no time to do one. Since that last tour I needed another 2 albums worth of material, which left me at the end of the last album, and it just didn't feel the right time to tour. So here I am at the end of this album, and if anything I feel a very strong urge to try and get some visual projects happening before another tour. But it's not that I don't want to, it's just really finding the time and the moment.
Are you going to do it again, though?
Well, I have been saying for the last 6 years, it must be now, that I would love to. And I would love to. I would have to see what happens.
But you put so much effort into that one tour, and people are still talking about it. I remember seeing it on TV, I think, as well. It was on there, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, are you going to have to do all that again? Are you going to have the same approach to the tour as you seem to have the album, you know?
That's again the thing, that where you enter a project and you think you're walking into quite a small room like the TARDIS, but when you get in there it's enormous, and I think that's a bit like nearly everything I do. And that's again why doing a tour requires so much thought, because it is a time-consuming process. But I'd love to, and I think actually it could be much better than the last tour, because some of the material lends itself very well to theatrical visuals.
It's the Simon Mayo Record of the Week.
Radio 1.
Well, we normally do this chat on a Monday, but it matters not, because Tuesday, second play for the Record of the Week, and I'm really excited about this, because about, I would say, gosh, I've forgotten that, about 10 or 12 years ago, I was listening to the radio, and this record came on, and it went, out on a windy... Except it was an awful lot more impressive than that. And I thought, this has got to be the record of the decade. I was so excited. I dashed out and bought it, and bought everything that the lady's done since. That was, of course, a terrible version of Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush, and Kate's on the line. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Simon.
What did you think of that little rendition of Wuthering Heights?
You had the wrong key, actually.
Was it? What key should it have been?
A major.
A major.
I think you were A flat.
I think A totally flat. Absolutely right. Anyway, Kate, good morning.
Good morning.
And thanks for having a chat with us. Brand new single, This Woman's Work, from the album.
Yes.
What's the inspiration behind that? Where does the song come from?
Well, I was asked to write this song by John Hughes, the American film director,
Right.
who just finished making a film of his called She's Having a Baby. And he had lots of material for the film generally, which is quite a light-hearted film, apart from one sequence where the film gets very heavy, and he's actually waiting for his wife in hospital, whose baby is in a breech position. And all through the sequence in the film, really, he's having to sit there with himself and his memories, and he's obviously in a lot of distress. And the song is very much from his point of view, and exploring the sorrow that one feels when you're waiting for someone you care very much about. And that's what the song's saying.
There are very few songs about pregnancy. We played the 10,000 Maniac single the other day, which is called Eat for Two. And when you were talking about that, I just remembered The Kick Inside, and one of the tracks from your first album. Is it something that you consciously try to write about? Is it just like a recurring theme? Or?
Well, I think probably for all writers, Simon, there are key themes, and birth, life and death are, for all of us, three major events. They're what life is all about. And I think birth is obviously a very symbolic thing as well as a real physical thing. And it was a real honour for me, really, to be asked to write this song for this piece of film. I'm not sure I would have written something like it otherwise.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Well, I think it works wonderfully. We'll play it in just a second.
Thank you.
I think actually it might have been in the end, one of the last interviews that Roger Scott ever did for the Saturday Sequence, when he was having a chat with you about your album.
Yes.
And he asked you the question, which I know you know I'm going to ask this, and everyone else does. And as he asked it, I went through a tunnel and I missed the answer. So I'll ask you now. On behalf of all the people who know I was about to speak to you, said you must ask her, when is she going to play live? We demand that we see Kate singing live, so I'm just asking on behalf of them.
Simon, I think we're going through another tunnel right here. I can't hear you very clearly.
Okay, well, I'll fax the message through. You're not getting off the hook with this. Are you going to play live, Kate? Please.
The thing is, Simon, I haven't toured for such a long time, and as I think I said to Roger,
Yeah.
I'm astounded at how I've got away with what I do, really. The fact that I'm not seen in public so much, and it takes me such a long time to make albums. I would love to tour again, but I've been so wrapped up in making albums, it just hasn't happened. And believe me, if I do decide to, everyone will know immediately.
So you're still thinking about it?
It means a tremendous amount to me that people still would like to see me live, but it's a combination of fear and commitment. And touring is something you really have to want to do. And I guess I just haven't hit that point again.
Okay. Well, when you do, there'll be a whole army of people waiting to see you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And,
thank you.
gosh, I could carry on chatting like this for a while. But I better not. We'll play the record. This is the record of the week this week. Kate Bush and This Woman's Work. Kate, thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon.
I should be crying, but I just can't let it show.
Six Music's artist collection. Kate Bush. Six Music.
Seems to have taken quite a long time. First album since 1993. Does it feel like a long time to you?
Yes.
Why has it taken so long?
Well, I suppose when I finished the last record, I really didn't want to go straight back in and make another one. I thought I'd take a year out because up
Which
until
takes us to 1994.
Yeah, it's been a long year.
Yeah.
After about a year, I decided that it was just something I wanted to kind of stay with a bit longer. I suppose really since I was about 17 or 18, I'd gone and made a record, promoted it, and then gone straight back in to do the next one. And because they take such a long time, there's the impression that there's these big gaps in between where I'm not doing anything. But with a lot of those records, I was actually working on them for a long time, and it's quite an intense process. And I think it got to the point at the end of the last one where I just thought, I don't want to just go straight in and do another one. I want to just take a break and do some other stuff.
Why does it take so long?
Well, it's a very good question. I asked myself that. The actual writing is normally very quick.
Yeah.
With a lot of them, what I do is go in and just write straight onto tape.
Right, so that's the first time the song exists outside your head is when you go in the studio.
Yes.
So it's all just in there and it just all flows out. In one take.
No, it just sort of comes together.
Right.
It's a bit different with piano vocal tracks. That would be written at the piano as opposed to written onto tape, and then once I'd written it I would then just put it onto tape. So that's a different process, because that's the way I always used to write when I was a little girl, really. I just used to sit at the piano and write the songs, and in a way it was like I was the tape machine, I guess. But once I started working in my own studio, I wanted to stop making demos, because the problem was you'd make a demo and it would be really good, but you couldn't use it because it wasn't, technically sounding right. So you try to reproduce it and it would never sound the same. It wouldn't have the atmosphere or the buzz. So I thought, well, let's not make demos, let's just put it straight onto master tape. And that way, even though you might redo elements of it, you've always got that initial energy and atmosphere.
It's called Ariel. There's a sea of honey and a sky of honey. What's the concept that's driving it?
Well, one of the things I thought I did wrong with the last record was I think it was too long. And what I was trying to do was give people as much for their money as possible. With the last record, I was making a CD as opposed to a vinyl record.
It's a problem, isn't it? I think a lot of my favourite albums, there might be 8 tracks on it, and it's great, and you can turn it over and everything. And there was this thing with CDs where people think it takes 70 minutes, therefore we should do 70 minutes. And it's a mistake, isn't it? It can be a mistake.
I think it's very difficult because I think as an artist you want to give people their money's worth, and in a lot of ways people's attention span doesn't really last that long. And what was so great about vinyl records was you had that forced gap. Take a pinch of keyhole and fold yourself. I suppose also I always really liked the process of making Hounds of Love, which was a similar idea, except that was one side of a record rather than 2 records. So in some ways this is a bit like a kind of larger version, more like a sort of Irish Wolfhounds of Love.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people haven't got a clue what it's about. And
You like that though, don't you?
yes, I do. I think it's brilliant. And I think whatever I have in my head when I write it is important to me, but I think it's very important how that works for people who then listen to it or see it or whatever art form it is, because then they become a part of the process. It's like when you read a book, part of that process of reading that book is you as the reader. You're as important as the book, really. I mean, it couldn't actually exist as a book unless you were there reading it. I think you become part of the process. So how you interpret it and mishear lyrics and ideas is great.
So you don't want to say what it's about because you think that kind of negates that process for people then?
Yeah, I think so in a way. I mean, I thought it would be interesting to put this out as a first single because people might be intrigued by the lyrics because, they're not terribly straightforward. I don't think of myself as somebody who's going to come up with writing a hit single, so I thought that might just give it a bit of mileage, that there would be a story there for people to try and discover.
You'd rather not have to talk about it at all.
Yes, I would, but I want people to know that the record's out there, and so I have to let people know that it's out there. But, I just get on with my life, and so this, for me, is just a very small part of it. And yet for people standing at the outside looking in, this is the bit that they see, and then they have this impression of me just retreating away, into some sort of big vampire castle or something. But to me, it's mad because, this is just the little bit where I come and say, hi, the album's out, please go and buy it.
Were you always reluctant to be a celebrity right from the beginning?
But I don't think of myself as a celebrity. I don't think I am. To me, that's a dirty word, really.
Well, I mean, reluctant to be a pop star then, or reluctant to be famous?
I don't like pop star either.
I know you don't, you've laughed. I mean, no, famous. You can't argue with famous.
Infamous, I would prefer.
Celebrated. Cherished.
Oh, cherished is lovely. I don't mind that. I mean, I find it completely ridiculous, this obsession with celebrities. The important people are surgeons and doctors and people who actually put people back together and make a difference to people's lives, not somebody who's in an ad on telly. I mean, okay, so that's valid for what it is too, but why so much attention on something that's so shallow?
Some people seem to kind of want fame just for itself. Maybe there's nothing wrong with that. I can't understand that. I mean, you find that kind of difficult because fame, which you've undoubtedly attained, is almost like the unwanted byproduct of what it is that you do, isn't it, really? Has there ever been a time where you enjoyed the fame? When you were younger, did you enjoy being Kate Bush, the pop star? I noticed you laughed when you said pop star, because you obviously don't see yourself as a pop star. But you were a pop star. I saw you on Top of the Pops doing the #1 hit single, so you must have been. Did you ever enjoy that?
I think still there are lots of times when it's fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's important if you can to try and keep it fun because, in a lot of ways it's quite ridiculous, really. What I desired was not to be famous. And I think that's the difference. I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to make a record. That was the big thing. And I was on a mission from God. And that's what I was going to do.
Were you always nervous about that? I mean, at the beginning, it must have felt, as a young girl in the music, it must have felt great.
Nervous about what?
Being known, being famous, being bothered when you go out.
No, I thought it was absolutely hilarious at first.
Even at that age, you was kind of, you know...
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
And it was, my first record was very successful.
Yeah.
Which was, I think, a big surprise to everybody, really.
Was it a surprise to you?
Yeah, it was. I didn't expect it to do as well as it did. I mean, I hoped it would do well, but it was an extraordinary success for a first record.
You'd worked quite a long time on that, hadn't you? Just very briefly, I don't want to go through all the thing again. I mean, you were kind of signed to EMI for a long time, and they let you alone to sort of find your feet a bit, didn't they?
Well, that's what they say.
Right, so they were pressurising you all the time?
No, they weren't pressurising me. It was quite the opposite. I wanted to make a record, and I think in a lot of ways what they did was they signed me because they could see that there was potential there. Then they just left me, and I think there was an element of them not wanting somebody else to sign me. I mean, through the help of Dave Gilmour, I had at least 2 of the tracks that were on the first album. That was what was presented to the record company. So Man with a Child in His Eyes basically got me signed.
I hear him before I go to sleep and focus on the day that's been. I realize he's there when I turn the light off and turn over. Nobody knows about my man.
Looking back on Kate Bush at that time and how you used to present things, I had a flashback to that Not the 9 o'clock News, Pamela Stephenson. What was it? Say, Oh England, my leotard, or something. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Did you find that flattering? Maybe you found it insulting, or maybe you thought, no, I've arrived because I'm being taken off on Not the 9 o'clock News, which was the biggest TV show of that era.
Well, I was very flattered because, I mean, she was very beautiful. I think at the time I was very nervous because I was worried that people were just taking the piss out of me, because I was having the piss taken out of me so much by everybody. But I saw it a couple of years later and I thought it was brilliant. It was really wonderful.
You were marketed in quite a sensual or sexual way, weren't you, at that time?
I don't think I was marketed.
Well, the photographs that came out at that time were, you know, very sensual photographs, weren't they? Very womanly photographs. There was nothing wrong with that, but was that kind of... Did you go along with that, or were you quite surprised to see some of the images when they came out?
But you make it sound like it was something that was put together against my will.
I don't know whether it was or it wasn't. I mean, you were young. It would be quite understandable.
You mean,
if some of it did
the early
kind of...
photographs that we used?
Yeah.
Well, no, because at that time I was a dancer, and I think...
That was what you saw yourself as first and foremost, wasn't it?
No, I saw myself as a singer, but I was also a dancer. And how do you present yourself as a singer in a photograph unless you're standing in front of a microphone? I was very comfortable in my body. I was a dancer. Most dancers are, you know. All the dancers, when I was in dance classes, used to wear leotards. There was no big deal.
Yeah.
Music's Artist Collection.
Kate, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for letting me pop round to see you. Now, so we are here to talk about the album 50 Words for Snow, wintry in title and in sound. And I did read that you'd been wanting to make a wintry record for ages. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I'm not sure why really, but it just, I suppose I really love winter. And I just love the idea of trying to create an album that had that kind of atmosphere that goes with winter. And when I started writing, quite soon it became honed down to just snow.
Right. And what was it about snow? Why just snow?
Well, I just think it's incredibly fascinating. I mean, it's, you know, since I was a kid, I'm sure like all of us, you know, it has this incredible magical quality. And because we're lucky here, we don't get tons of it. We don't get snowed in for months on end. It still has a sort of, you know, sort of preciousness without it being, you know, a complete pain in the arse.
Until it's been here a few weeks. But no, you're right. I think the interesting thing about snow is that when it arrives, it makes everybody into a child in a way, doesn't it? Because you do feel there is something wonderful about it. So there is that quality. But there's also, like, you know, with winter and snow, a lot of that imagery is kind of often used to convey sort of sadness and loss. Is there any of that on the record, do you think?
Well, I suppose there is. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, once I kind of focused in on this idea of snow, then of course
offsprung all these different imageries that go with snow. I mean, the fact that it's so fleeting, that, you know, it's there and then it melts away, and, you know, the sort of sense of silence that you also get with snow, and, you know, the magical side, but like you say, also perhaps the sort of more desolate connections as well.
You talk about it being atmospheric, and it certainly is. I mean, it is a very atmospheric record, but I find that interesting that you have this kind of, it's a constructed approach to something that actually you might think is kind of done in an intuitive way, because, you know, you're looking to capture the atmosphere of something. Would you say that you have a kind of planned approach to making when you're actually starting on, you know, a specific track, or are you an intuitive worker, songwriter?
Well, I suppose it depends with each album. You know, with this one, what happened, I think, was that because I'd immediately before starting this been working on the album Director's Cut, which is a really difficult album to make. As soon as I'd finished that, there was this incredible sense of elation, because suddenly I could start from scratch. I could write new songs and I could go wherever I wanted. And also I was still in that mental space of being mental space, mind space, or mental space.
The mental space is
of being in the studio without, you know, it sort of being taken off into, you know, promotion or whatever you would normally do when you finish an album. And it was weird, because this album actually had a real kind of flow to the whole process, and was fun and actually quite, I wouldn't say easy, but it wasn't a difficult album to make.
It had a kind of freedom to it.
Yes, it did, and a lot of it was me just kind of sitting at the piano, letting these songs evolve.
It's interesting that you know you've done these 2 records in a year, which is no small undertaking. But that one is kind of, you know, the idea of revisiting music, and then the other one is very much the absolute blank page, which was scarier.
Or the revisiting. It was scary because I thought it was going to be really easy, and it wasn't. And I hadn't expected that. Well, I thought, you know, all the songs were written. It was just a matter of banging some new vocals down and, you know, just kind of, you know, stripping some of the tracks out and putting more space in. And but it wasn't like that at all. It was quite technical on a lot of levels, because we edited a lot of the tracks to make them longer and put more space in them. And then when I came to actually sing the tracks, it was so not what I'd expected, because I was trying to be that person then. And of course, then I'd put so much work into those vocals anyway. I didn't actually quite know if I was going to be able to better them or equal them. And then what happened was I worked out that if we took the songs down in key, I could get in as Me Now. And that was the turning point. Once I did that, I could then sing them as Me Now and not this person from years ago. So there were all these kind of weird elements that went with the album that I just wasn't expecting.
And how do you feel having had such a creative year? I mean, to put 2 records out and you know, be reaching the end of the year now, do you feel a sense of satisfaction, or is it sheer exhaustion? Where are we at this point?
Well, I think shock is... I still can't believe I've actually managed to finish this record in time for this winter, because, you know, it's not the sort of record you could put out in the summer. So if I hadn't have been able to get it out for this winter, I would have had to wait until next winter, and I really didn't want to. I wanted it to be quite fresh, and so huge relief and shock.
Oh, well, sorry about the shock, but congratulations on the relief. There are some interesting contributions on the record from a few people that I'd like to ask you about. Stephen Fry, Elton John, and your son, as well as Bertie. Is he the first voice we hear on the record?
Yes.
Yeah. How did they come about? Starting with Bertie, why did you decide to get him involved?
Well, he's got, at the moment, he still has his very high voice. He can reach these incredibly beautiful, pure notes, very similar to a chorister. And quite soon, as he'll lose that voice as he starts to grow older. And I wanted to try and capture his voice on tape at this point in a song that I really hoped would show him off. So I wrote the song for him, but also was kind of drawing this parallel between the fleetingness of his voice and the life of a snowflake.
Yeah. And what about Elton John? I know that he was a big hero of yours when you were growing up, and you wrote the song for him that he appears on, right?
Yes. you know, he's still a big hero of mine. I think he's very special, and he was a huge influence on me when I was starting to write songs. And when I was writing this song and suddenly realised that it was going to become a duet, I just thought of him immediately and thought how great it would be if he could get involved.
And was it fun to do in the studio, the two of you?
Oh, it was fantastic.
And what about Stephen Fry, who does not sing? We should, just in case we're about to play the tracks and people will hear it. But is he? You know, how did he?
Well, he doesn't sing, but he is very musical. And when I'd written all these words, which of course most of them are made up, the idea was that they'd start off quite sensible, but would gradually get sillier and sillier. And I wanted someone who had a great voice of authority. And of course the thing about Stephen is he's so intelligent that everyone thinks that anything he says is really important. But he also has an incredibly beautiful sounding voice. I mean, you know, he's a fantastic actor, he's a comedian. He was, I don't think anybody could have done it better. So again, I was so delighted when he could come in and do it.
He also has a sense of playfulness, though, I would say, and a sense of fun.
Yes.
Is that something that's important to you?
Yes, very much so. And I think this song in particular creates an important balance on the album because it is just fun, really. And some of the tracks are quite long and possibly intense. So to just have something that's a bit of fun is important.
Yeah, well, especially again, you know, returning to the wintry theme, there is a kind of poignance about winter and about snow. As you say, it is something that is this magical temporary state, really, because you know that it's not going to last for long. I wonder if that influenced the actual recording of it. You know, the idea of capturing something. That's what you do with a song. When you're making a song, really, you are kind of capturing a moment, and you can never quite capture the same one twice.
Very poetic.
Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think it's very true. And I think in a way, this is what I started to find so interesting when I was writing about snow. The imagery just kept coming. I mean, I think I could easily have written another album's worth. I mean, I say that, you know, I don't know, but I certainly wasn't lost for inspiration dealing with just that one subject. So perhaps in some ways that's where the myth of 50 words for snow comes from, because again, the idea of having so many words about one thing is such a beautiful idea, isn't it?
46. Anechoic. 47. Blown from polar fur. 48. Vanishing world. 49. Mistral despair. 50.
Your music sits at an interesting kind of point, which is the point that is sort of straddles and is both pop music and art. And I think that's an external perception. I think that's something that other people would say. I don't think of those two things as different. I think pop music can be art and often is art. But I wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think, you know, pop music can be art, and I think art can be so many different things. And I guess, you know, I've never really thought of myself as being part of the, you know, the pop industry. You know, it's kind of just something that I do. I make albums, and I suppose I feel there's quite a naturally evolving process that I've moved through that is gradually starting to move away from pop music, and, you know, probably connected with me getting older, and also the idea that each time I start an album I want to try and do something different. And also I really like working in these longer forms, like, you know, before I've maybe worked on a side of an album or a CD that was conceptual. And with this record, it was playing with the idea of longer song structures. So rather than just working within a 3 or 4 minute structure, to just kind of let them unfold and let the story be able to, you know, just become much more more involved journey.
So that's something that's developed over the years. How long did it take you to get to that point? I mean, you know, say when you were working on the Kick Inside, was your songwriting process very different to the way it is now?
No, I'm not sure it was. I think in a way this album is probably the most similar to that album because so much of it was to do with sitting down at the piano and writing the songs before I went into the studio. And with some other albums, I've actually written in the studio, you know, just put rough ideas down and then developed them.
Listening to your records, listening to all of your records, I think you always get a sense of someone who's very sure of themselves and very sure of what they want to say in some ways. But I wonder whether anybody can really feel like that at 19. When you listen back to the records that you made at first, you know, because when anybody's a teenager, they're not quite themselves. You become yourself, I think, as you get older. Do you look back at those records or listen back to those records and kind of hear a different person, hear a different you?
Well, I don't really listen to my old records. Come up. But if I ever hear, you know, bits from my really early albums, I mean, it's just a completely different person. I mean, I think, you know, in essence, I'm the same, but I think, you know, my music sounds really different to me, but I would want that. I wouldn't want it to sound the same. I think, you know, hopefully you want to evolve and change through life.
You mentioned the music industry and kind of, you know, feeling at arm's length from the kind of industry aspect of music. But I was interested to ask you about that because obviously you've seen, you know, been making records for a long time now and seen the music industry change a lot, you know, going from this kind of, it seems like, you know, in the 70s it must have been a time of great sort of hubris and really high tide. And now in some ways, you know, people say the music industry is at a low ebb. Certainly the business side of it is in dire straits, pardon the pun. You know, what do you think about the way things are now? Do you think there's a lot to be gained for artists to release their own stuff, to kind of take back control, or is it more difficult that people can't get signed? They don't have the financial support of a big record label to help them along.
Well, I think you know, all businesses are having real problems. Everyone's struggling because of the economic climate, but also, you know, just this enormous kind of period of change that we're all going through with, you know, technology, and I think just the whole planet is going through this incredible sort of changing, scary time. And I think, you know, probably a lot of stuff that we're going through now will settle down in a few years and then change again. And I think the great thing about the music business is that it does and should ultimately revolve around music, and music will always be there and will always be important in a lot of ways. And I think the one thing I do get concerned about is that at the moment I feel there's this sense of music being made disposable in a way, that there's so much of it and it's almost being devalued by a lot of the processes that are going on. You know, I would hate to see the album as an art form, you know, being left behind, because I think I love albums. You know, I grew up listening to albums, not just a track. And I think, you know, it's great to listen to just one track, but it's nice to keep that longer form as well. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And in some ways, I think it's more difficult for new artists, but in other ways, it's easier. So it's just this whole process presumably will settle down into something, but
what that's going to be.
Yeah.
Another kind of defining characteristic of music at the moment is that, you know, irony intended, the female solo artist is king at the moment. That is, you know, very much kind of a dominant trend, and obviously you are someone who always comes up when we get, you know, when a new female singer-songwriter comes through. Often, I mean, Florence is the obvious example. Florence Welch has been, you know, compared to you. Do you think that times have changed for women making music, and that there is a more of a concentration on what they create rather than what they look like, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. And I think, like you say, there's such a wealth of female talent at the moment. It's great. About time too.
I mean, when you were first in, you know, part of the pop scene and say released your first record, was there kind of a prevalence of sexist attitudes, do you think, in the music industry that you wouldn't really be allowed to espouse, or kind of behaviour that you wouldn't get away with these days? Did you ever come up against that?
I think I was really lucky in a lot of ways, because I had such a lot of support from the people that I worked with, and also from my family, and I was so driven. I'm not sure I would have been aware of a lot of stuff that was going on around me anyway in that kind of way, because it was just, I just had this incredible determination and focus to make an album was the first goal, and then to make another one.
You did kind of find fame and start making music at a very young age. What was that experience like? What was the experience, the kind of famousness part, the part that you've always seemed to have shied away from?
Well, I suppose it was kind of my first hit. Was that I mean, none of us thought that the album or the single would be particularly successful at all, and it was a shock. It was not what any of us thought would happen, and quite surreal, and you just kind of get carried along by it and you just go with it, and it was quite funny in a lot of ways, and exciting, and then I suppose quite early on I began to realise that all my time was being spent promoting and travelling around the world, which was a lot of fun, but it meant I wasn't spending the time on the actual creative process, which was that's what I'd wanted. I'd never really been driven to be famous. That wasn't the desire. So I realised that it was all getting turned upside down. So I then made a decision to just turn it back round again and make the main bulk of my time spent making albums.
You've said that you did actually love playing live. You very much enjoyed it, but that you wanted, as you say, to focus on making records and being in the studio. Is that where you're happiest?
Yeah, I mean, I love making albums, and it wasn't that I'd ever thought I'll never tour again, but it's just kind of the way things went. I became much more involved in the whole process of production, and the album started to take longer, and so that's just how it happened.
What happens after you've made a record, usually? You've made 2 this year, and as you were saying, a little bit in shock, but equally delighted. Will you take a break now? Or are you somebody who always likes to be working?
No, I definitely take a break. Yeah, I've got a lot of catching up to do. Lots of piles of stuff around the house to try and clear.
A clear out?
Yeah, I think a clear out time, definitely.
Right. Is this a sporadic Kate Bush activity? The clear out?
Well, it's been really intense actually the last few years, because especially when I finished Director's Cut, because when I was then sort of halfway through this album, I had to start promoting Director's Cut, and I almost at some points got confused about which album I was meant to be talking about, and so there were these 2 really consuming projects going on at the same time, and so it's been very busy and fun, really fun, but very busy, and I'm looking forward to have some time to just chill a bit.
Well, listen, we're very glad that you completed them so successfully. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's been lovely to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you too.
Kate.
Thank you.
6 Music.
6 Music.
6 Music.
6 Music.
6 Music's artist collection. Kate Bush.
On the 26th of August 2014, Kate Bush walked on stage at the Hammersmith Apollo in London, kicking off her first series of concerts in 35 years. The 22-show residency, entitled Before the Dawn, was as inventive and original as anything in Kate's remarkable musical back catalogue. The scale and theatrical ambition of the production stunned audiences. It was unlike any concert before or since. These legendary gigs have now been documented in a new live album, also called Before the Dawn, and to mark the release, Kate has done a rare interview, her first in 5 years in fact, to talk about the concerts, the themes behind them, and her experiences returning to the stage. Her previous tour, the Tour of Life, actually came to an end at the very same venue that hosted Before the Dawn, the Hammersmith Apollo, which is where our conversation started. So this is 14th of May 1979. Can you remember how you felt like walking off stage on the last night?
Completely exhausted.
Because there was this kind of myth that it was difficult and maybe you didn't have fun, but you've since kind of said actually you did really enjoy the show.
Oh yeah, no, it was great fun. Yeah, it was a bit like being in a circus troupe. It was a lot of fun, yeah, but really it was so physical and a long show as well. I was completely exhausted.
Because we know why you stopped playing live, which was to spend time with your family and focus on being a recording artist. But how long before the offers kind of started coming in? Did the phones start ringing quite soon after that tour in 79?
Well, the intention had always been to actually do another set of shows after I'd done another 2 albums, so that I could have new material for the next shows. But then as I got to that, what would have been the 4th album, I'd become much more involved in the whole recording process and was starting to produce. And it just became a kind of slightly different path than the one I'd imagined a few years beforehand. So there was never an intention to go for such a long time without doing shows at all. It just kind of went off in a different direction.
Did people call you up and try and convince you to do it?
I can't remember. It's a very long time ago. And there were a couple of points where I thought that I would get a chance to do some live work. But for whatever reason, it never really happened. I suppose, when albums have taken such a long time to make, and then there's always this sort of process post-album where, there's an element of promotion, but also making visuals to go with it, which I always get very involved in. And then before you know it, the time has kind of rolled on, and it almost feels like it's the time to start a new project. And I suppose the longer that it got, the more I just started to feel that perhaps I wouldn't do shows again.
So what changed your mind? I guess this is the question. This is the first big question, isn't it?
Well, it was like I'd done 2 albums in really quite quick succession, and I really felt like doing something different. I really wanted to do something that wasn't going to mean sitting in the studio for a couple of years just putting an album together. So it just felt like the right time. It was a fun idea to toy with, but actually pushing the button to go was something that I had to really seriously build up to.
Was there a certain amount of fear before kind of making that call and going, right, I don't know when, but it is going to happen? Were you quite nervous?
Yeah, I was terrified. The idea of putting the show together was something that I found really interesting and really exciting, to be able to put a visual theatrical piece together. But to actually step into it was something that I had to really work hard on, because I was terrified of doing live work as a performer again.
What role did Bertie play in your son Bertie played in your decision to kind of come back?
He was really key, because it was something that I wanted him to be involved in, because he's very creative, and he was very positive about the whole idea of doing some shows.
So you've said, okay, I'm going to do this. Were there certain, I don't know, kind of criteria that you put down? Go, okay, if I do it, then it's not going to be like, right, we're going to do 6 dates at Wembley, then we're going to spend 4 years on tour. I mean, what were the parameters that you put for yourself, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I had toyed with ideas beforehand, if I were to do some live work. And I think the thing that made it really interesting for me was that I wanted to mainly base it around 2 of the conceptual albums that I'd done, so that it was working with a narrative rather than just individual songs. So there was already a kind of sketched shape in that I knew I wanted to start with a bunch of songs that would seem as if it were just a straight concert, that would then slip into the 9th Wave, and then the other half of the show would be Sky of Honey, so that there would be this enormous contrast between the 2 pieces, because they're completely different. They're sort of opposing in their atmospheres and journeys.
I mean, it's quite an obvious question, but did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the shows? Did you have fun? Because it's a simple question, but with something this large, it's a complex one as well, I think.
Well, I was pretty terrified most nights, really, and it was like I say, it was that thing of trying to hold on to the now so that I would know where I was in the song, which I think probably did give me an element of real kind of concentration, genuine concentration on what I was doing. Towards the end, yes, I was just starting to feel relaxed enough to enjoy parts of it. The bit I really enjoyed was the end, because I knew that I wouldn't have to try and remember the words for much longer.
Do you regret not doing it earlier? You're like, oh, this feels brilliant. Why did I not do this before?
Well, I don't know. That's a hard thing to say, isn't it? Because I think, had I done it before, then perhaps the same level of material wouldn't have existed. I was up there as somebody who had lived their life up to that point. It would have been a different show. I don't know if I can say I wished I'd done it before, but I'm really glad that I did do this. It was a really incredible experience. It was wonderful working with all those people, and it was very moving feeling the response from the audiences every night, to have that connection. It was very special. I'm really pleased that we all got up there and did that.